Welcome to RSA Conference 2023. We're recording live from Broadcast Alley here in Moscone West. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with Jon Check, the Executive Director of Cyber Protection Solutions at Raytheon Intelligence Space. Hello, Jon.
Hey,
welcome.
Mike. How are you today?
I'm doing very well. It's the last day of the conference. We're kicking things off. So I appreciate you taking the time.
I see we've fully transitioned to only sneakers at this point.
Absolutely. Stay comfortable and relax. We got to survive.
That's right.
The other thing so companies also need to survive because CISOs don't enjoy writing those breach disclosures that start, "We take your security seriously."
Right.
So that's a little bit of a reactive response. Incidents, I'm not being pessimistic, I think, when we say that organizations are probably going to be breached in one way or another. They should be prepared, but it's a lot better to be prepared. So what are some ways that we can start thinking of incident response before the incident happens?
Well, I think the number one thing is across all of your business, no matter what the job role is, whether it's security, supply chain, legal, talent acquisition, everybody has to have some level of baseline and be a stakeholder in what your response is going to be. Communications, because it takes everybody, once something happens, to recover. And without them being aware, if the first time they really hear about it or understand what a certain type of attack might be, I mean, certain things have made it out into the public domain enough, like ransomware, where people at least have some level of understanding. But they might not understand all the other aspects of what different type of attacks might look like.
Yeah, and you rattled off a great list there, and it went well beyond just like, the developer who sees this is the RCE or this is the CVE number that they hit, and how do we respond to this? There's comms in there, there's legal, there's privacy. So, but they're not dealing with code, I don't think, all the time. So how do you bring them in? How do you say we're going to have a breach, or rather than say, without scaring them, with getting them prepared for what something looks like?
Critical part is also, so what is the role of everyone when something does happen? So the way you bring them in is, if there are, you have cybersecurity insurance, you have breach insurance. Okay, so what does that mean? What happens, how do you engage with your insurer? What is their role and responsibility? Are they going to show up with their own response teams and say, whatever teams you have, stand those down, because we'll take it from here to figure out what happened? Or you can really understand how that process works, so people know where to engage and how to engage, and what their roles are. There may be certain emergency procurements you need to do, or certain legal actions that need to be taken related to a breach, whether it's informing your stakeholders or other things that may require you to ensure that you're responding properly.
So these are lots of, sounds like lots of documentation, processes, run books. I'm a D&D player. I like that type of tabletop gaming. I'm sure there's got to be an aspect of tabletop exercises here too. Run something through.
100%. And that's one of the critical aspects is it's hard to get people's attention to do a tabletop exercise.
Oh, yeah.
So one of the things we really try to do when we're hosting those for partner companies that we work with is getting them out of their day-to-day job for a day and really pulling them out to like almost an off-site type event where they can be focused, and you can try to get them into the mindset of a breach has happened versus, okay, 2 hours, I spent all morning doing my day job, whatever that might be. I go into a room for 2 hours, do a tabletop exercise, checking my phone, email, smart devices the whole time, and then leave 2 hours later, and did you really participate? Do you really understand? Are you really in the moment?
Take away? Yeah.
That's one of the critical things, is really got to be in the moment to really fully engage and not be distracted by all the things that are out there that like to distract us.
So what are some fun ways to set up scenarios for organizations? Because, I'm going to imagine not everybody's heard of Log4j, SolarWinds, these big things, but not everybody's going to be attacked like SolarWinds. It might be ransomware or something like that. What do you set up to get those people engaged so they're not checking their phones?
Well, we try to find something topical to the industry they're in, and where their focus is, because there's, like you mentioned earlier, there's probably an example of your industry where somebody's been breached.
Very likely.
And that really gives them a good idea. So if you're a retailer, what does that supply chain look like now that your e-commerce site is down and you're losing $1 million an hour because no one can buy your products from your presence? So that's really got to think through, what does that look like? How do you have what level of resiliency could you build in? How would you get some level of that customer, externally facing site back up to where you can do what your business is there to do, which is provide that product to your customers?
And what's interesting so far is that we've talked about, you rattled off a list of people, important positions, what their roles are, responsibilities. We talked about tabletops and processes. We haven't touched on tools, and it's interesting. I think that we're coming to that last. Are they less important? What's their role in, like, can't the tools just protect us all from getting breached?
Yeah, you just install this and it works. You know, you don't have to worry about anything else.
It'd be so much easier.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I hear sometimes. Well, it's really the most critical thing in any tooling is really, are you taking the time to truly integrate whatever you have purchased as part of your framework of what is the key things you want to defend, and how are you taking advantage of it? Buying a tool for the sake of a tool because it will just do something makes no difference. I really, like I mentioned, like to take the KonMari approach. Get rid of the clutter. You don't need to have 50 tools that have overlap and you've got one because it does 5% of something. Is that really totally necessary if you're not going to utilize it? Or also if you're putting yourself at risk where you've got a single smart subject matter expert that's responsible for a tool. When that person leaves, that causes real problems. And we see that with our partner companies a lot of times that we work with. They have that key person leave and all of a sudden they're calling us to say, hey, can you pick this up for us? Because we can't fill this role again. This person's gone. So it's really the tooling is absolutely critical, but it all comes down, I mean, I'm in the people business. It's 100% about the people. And if the people aren't a part of how you establish the tool chain, what's it supposed to do, what are the outcomes you're desiring, and they're not given the proper training and downtime to really appreciate and think about things. It can't just be a continuous grind where they're on the job and it's the next thing coming at them.
Burnout's so easy to hit.
It's terrible. And so that's one of the things we really try to focus on is giving people the time to, rest, refit, and retool. Nothing new.
That's a great approach, and that's treating people well, so they be also sharp. And that's why you also practice, but they're also not burned out. They're not just overly cynical about why are we doing this today? I'll just hit this button.
Absolutely. I mean, I can tell from my personal experience. I used to stay up a lot. Right, didn't sleep very much. One day about 10 a.m. after working here in San Francisco, I walked to work at 6 a.m. 10 a.m. I looked down, I had 2 different colored shoes on. One had a heel about like this, one had a heel like this. I was like, sleep deprivation's a real thing.
That might have had a little bit of an impact. So that's a great counterexample of probably something not to do. We talked about communication, tabletop exercises. Do you have some other counterexamples of some ways perhaps not to prepare and not to respond that we could learn from?
Well, so like anything, when you have an emergency situation, everybody reacts differently, and so one of the big challenges is the understanding who on the team might have the sky is falling reaction and start going to panic mode. Because one of the worst things you can do when a breach or an incident happens is start taking action immediately without knowing, is that the action I should be taking at this time? If I do that, if I go run and turn off all the servers, was that really the thing I should have done? Right? You got to really
have a plan.
But people panic and they're going to do something to action because their phone's blowing up, the president of the company saying, what are you doing? Right? So they're going to take an action without understanding, okay, what's the sequence of actions we're going to take? Do I need to pause for a minute and make sure we work through this if you don't have a solid plan? But for me, one of the things that I see that's the worst thing somebody do is take action immediately without understanding, should I be taking that action? Creates way more problems in the long run, every time.
Every time. Totally believe it. And goes back to the idea, just be prepared, right? There's also an aspect, I was joking because I love to make fun of the phrase, we take your security seriously. It becomes a bit of a platitude and a bit empty if it's not followed up by anything of substance. But companies perhaps do need to prepare a breach disclosure of some kind. What do you look for? What do you recommend in the sense of transparency, sharing for their customers, sharing you've been impacted? How do you have that conversation in a positive way?
Well, we provide them with the information they need, right? That's up to them and their stakeholders, their board of directors, and the disclosures based on whatever regulations that industry needs to follow for how they're going to disclose. We certainly want to give them all the information they need, and we can give them examples of here's how it was done by companies in the past and it was perceived like it went very well, and here's examples where people maybe held on to information way too long and it was not the outcome. But that's really, again, that's that businesses based on where they want to be perceived by the public and where they're going to position themselves post-breach. And that's at a board level discussion, right? We're really there to help guide and provide information that allows them to report, but in the end, they have to make that call. And go back towards when there's an emergency and you're not prepared, you might not make the call you need to in the moment.
Absolutely. Then when you see that, how do you often see who makes that call, or do they also, even in the tabletop exercises or the processes and the planning, are there often parts of the organization that get forgotten or they get left out and everybody's like, oh, we actually should have spoken to Alice, Bob, in this particular department?
It's really, a lot of times it comes down to comms, communications,
Okay.
making sure that they're involved, and really somebody that is a communications person understands how to communicate to your stakeholders, whether they're customers, employees, board of directors, whatever the case might be. So that's a critical aspect of how do you frame a conversation? How do you make sure people really understand what's happened? What's their role in whatever's happened? What do they need to watch out for? So I'd say communications is one of the key groups that's not forgotten, but a lot of times the person in charge, whoever that might be, decides I'm going to be the communications person. I'm going to write up this email with whatever notice and send it out to people. It might not be the best approach. If you have that role, then it's really difficult because depending on the company size, they don't have that diversification. Maybe the person
That's true.
that's the president is the comms person, is the TA person. You never know what that person's other roles, other duties as assigned might be.
Suddenly they're wearing lots of hats, indeed, indeed. Now, I also talked about, I threw out SolarWinds, Log4j, ransomware. Are there certain types of attacks that you're seeing perhaps more prevalent now? I'm not necessarily trying to go, pull out the crystal ball, predict what the attacks are going to be, but are there certain patterns that of the type of threat actors that these are techniques they're using that people can prepare for, perhaps more so on the technology side too?
Well, it's definitely escalating, right? It's continued. Gone are the days when somebody sends you a poorly worded email. Now it's specifically targeted from your bank with your name, and maybe one of your relatives, it looks like it's coming from your relative.
Okay.
I mean, the amount of data that is out there now with the AI and those types of tools, coalescing those things based on, hey, I know who Jon Check is. I'm going to go search everything I know about him and do a very targeted campaign at him based on not just him, but, okay, who's he related to? What are the environmentals he's in? Where does that person go every day? What do they experience? That's the biggest challenges that I see is it's really escalated the targeting part of this. And that's super worrisome to me because that sophistication is way beyond what people have seen in a classic phishing email. It just manifests itself in maybe a phishing email and a text within the same, within 5 minutes that says, looks like it's the same information, right? Your bank is saying something. Well, I just got an email and I got a text. It must be my bank.
It must be, yes. And hopefully we, part of that too, maybe a little bit, we've been talking about preparing, the proactive aspects of responding to incidents. There's a little bit of the postmortems too. Hopefully we have moved beyond just blaming the user because it is this type of sophistication can fool anyone, especially if they're under pressure. And if we don't have multi-factor authentication, we don't have other tools, I think those are more of the failures that failed the people rather than the people themselves be blamed.
Well, I'm a pre-mortem guy. I want to I want to work, figure out before the patient's died, right? Post-mortem, it's too late. Something bad's happened. Let's do pre-mortem. So let's make sure that we're using multi-factor authentication.
Yes.
Let's make sure that people have a foundational level of awareness and understanding. That's where I am, firmly. Pre-mortem.
Yes.
No more post-mortem. It's too late.
I love a zombie movie myself, but I would agree with you. Let's do the pre-mortems. Just prevent as much as we can with those breaches.
That's right. Exactly.
Well, John, this is a wonderful conversation. You clearly came with a plan and well prepared to talk about incident response. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Really appreciate your time.
Appreciate it again, John. If you want to learn more about Raytheon, visit securityweekly.com/Raytheon RSAC. And stick around. We've got a lot more coming up on the live stream today.